I need to explore StreamYard now that it's new. Hello. Hello. Everyone who is here, welcome to our week 1 discussion for Adorning the Dark by Andrew Peterson. Please feel free to say hello in the comments. Let us know where you are located. And yeah, thanks to these lovely ladies for joining in. I'm going to have them go ahead and introduce themselves. And what was I going to say? Have you read anything or listened to Andrew Peterson's music before? So we'll just say, is this like your first introduction to him, or have you known of who he was or anything beforehand? So Bethany, you want to kick us off?
Yes. So I'm Bethany from Bethany's Bookshelf on YouTube. And I have read the first Wing Feather book to my son, and then we're currently reading the second one. So yeah, I love getting to a little peek behind the scenes and getting to know him better.
Cool. Keisha.
Hello, my name is Keisha, and I'm from A Book Like You on YouTube and on Instagram. And I am familiar with Andrew Peterson. Like, I knew that he wrote the Wing Feather Saga. That's where I knew his name. But prior to reading this book, I didn't know about like him creating music or anything like that. But after reading what we had to read for today, I did go and listen to some of his music. So
Nice. Katie.
Hi, I'm Katie from Paperbacks and Ponytails, both on YouTube and Instagram as well. And I have read the entire Wing Feather Saga. I actually listened to the audiobooks, which he narrates, which I think is really cool. So I listened to those and they were really good. And I also did not know that he did music and was a musician. So I am definitely going to look that up when we're done with this conversation today.
Fun. So I'm very clearly the oldest of this crew that's on screen today. And I will get into it as we talk about the chapters, but I knew Andrew Peterson first as a musician because I was high school, college when he was making music. And he, like, I remember Rich Mullins, the guy that he talks about going backstage to meet or whatever, like Rich Mullins wrote, "Our God is an awesome God, he reigns from heaven above." So Rich Mullins was like a popular folksy kind of singer-songwriter who passed away in a plane crash, like very tragically. And that happened while I was in college. So I kind of remember, and like he goes on tour with Caedmon's Call, and when I was in school, that was my favorite band. So I was like living my nostalgic Christian music life as he was saying all of these people. I'm like, oh, I loved Laura's Story. Oh, I loved I knew almost all of the ones that he talked about. So I've also read the first in the Wing Feather Saga. I own them all, but I have only read the first one because that's just how I am with series. Typically, I have a problem continuing. But yeah, so I am looking forward to kind of getting a little bit more of his backstory as well, because I do have like a general knowledge of who he is, but yeah. So Glenda has been to behold the Lamb, which he talks about quite a bit in chapter 4 in particular. That's cool. Cindy from Texas. Hi, Cindy. Pretty new to Andrew Peterson. Loving the book so far. Good. This is my introduction, Andrew Peterson. Hi, Lindsay. Good afternoon. I've already read this book and loved it, so I thought I'd follow. Wonderful. I'm glad that you're here. My favorite Andrew Peterson song is The Burning Edge of Dawn. It's basically on repeat these days. Okay, cool. I was wondering, I didn't look it up yet. I'm going to. I was wondering if there's a playlist on Spotify that anybody has made for this book already. That would be so cool to like be able to hear songs from some of these people and bands that he's mentioning, as well as his own music. That might be something to look into. I'm going to look into it. If I can find it, I'll link it in the description later. But I think that would be a fun kind of full body experience to like add to reading the book. Haven't started the book yet. It's on hold. Have heard his music, but never read anything until this book. Okay, great. Oh, there is. Sweet. Okay, I'm going to find it later and I'm going to link it in this video, and then I'll have it linked in future weeks as well. But how we're going to do it is just kind of chat through the first couple of chapters. It is not as dense as some of the other books that we've done. I mean, or like as introspective really as Hind's Feet was, or like, I don't know. It's a little different from the ones we've read as read-alongs before, but I still think it'll give us some good things to talk about. But what I wanted to ask you guys first is, this whole book is ultimately going to be about creativity. So I want to know, how do you feel like you're the most creative, or like, what is it that you're doing when you feel like you're using that creativity the most, or feel called to, maybe? Because I know that answer for some of you, but I don't know for all of you. So what is it that you do that feeds that creative part of you? We'll go backwards. Katie, I'll start with you because I know your answer.
Okay. Well, one of them is Bible journaling. I started that in 2020 when we couldn't really do anything. And God was like, you need to start doing this on YouTube. And that's how I actually got onto YouTube, was through Bible journaling. So I do a lot of creative with paint and scrapbooking and everything. And God just blew my mind with how that went. And then God led me to books and creativity through that. And now I'm writing my first novel, which hopefully God will open doors and guide me to where he wants me to write there.
Nice. How about you, Keisha?
I think my answer changes depending on the season of life that I'm in. Currently, it would be probably through like BookTube and Bookstagram and things like that. But I also do a little bit of bullet journaling, and so that's a form of creativity for me. But in the past, like, I've really wanted to be in a job where I can be creative. That's something I feel like I thrive in. I'm not currently in one of those, but when I was a children's librarian and getting to like create programs and things for kids, that's been one of my favorite things. So I think I just try to feed it somehow into each season of my life.
Nice. How about you, Bethany?
Okay, so I think currently probably the two biggest things are like BookTube, which I don't always feel super creative in, but I feel like that's kind of an area to develop. And then just kind of like parenting, homeschool, like that kind of stuff, which is also like an area I feel like needs some development. But yeah, those are like the big things right now. In the past, I have been like kind of into music a little bit, not singing, but like instruments, um, and also painting. Not, I don't know, like I just kind of did it for fun a little bit in college, and here lately I've kind of felt just like drawn to it a little bit. So
Nice. Yeah, I would say BookTube is a big outlet at the moment, probably the biggest outlet. And nannying, you have to be creative to keep the kids entertained and like active all day long. Or not all day, but and then I dabble here and there with like crochet and piano and watercolor, but I don't spend a lot of time, or consistent amounts of time, I should say, on any of those kind of artistic creative outlets. So yeah, I guess just BookTube would be the most consistent one for me too. But feel free in the comments to add your thoughts as well. But let's go ahead and start right in with chapter 1. I did not put a banner up for questions or anything, so we'll just kind of go through. And I guess the preface as well, we'll lump that in together. I didn't really underline anything in the preface, but if you guys had anything, it was just kind of an introduction to what he was going to be talking about.
I feel like I got the most out of the preface of the 4 chapters. So I'll say something about that.
Yeah.
I think it was just, there was a relatable part, and then like a theme that I liked that he talked about, which Roman numerals, X is 10, right? Is that right? That's where I'm
Yes.
at. Okay. So I really related with how he was talking about, wait, is this the right page? Hold on. Of course, I didn't underline what I was talking about. I was like, oh, I'll remember where it's at. Okay, I found it. So it's like midway through the first full paragraph where he says, as you'll see, I've spent a lot of my life following my nose, usually turning up that nose whenever I'm expected to do something I don't feel like doing. I realize this is a weakness, but it's a weakness God has redeemed again and again, one that has gotten me into a lot of trouble, the getting out of which has always led to something healing or edifying. And that, and along with the paragraph after that, I feel like I relate with that so much because I can be so stubborn and turn my nose up at things that I don't feel like doing. And I'm like this with work a lot. I was talking about being creative in a job, and I'm currently doing data entry and work in a registrar's office at a college. So I feel very stifled by that. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to be here. And I'm currently looking for another job, but it's because of that desire to be creative and to be able to like impact people through that creativity. And so just knowing that even though he and I have different things, like, you know, he's a musician and he writes books and it's a different thing, but like I can still find relatability with that sentiment.
Yeah, for sure. I just love to, it's a weakness. He recognizes that it's a weakness, but it's like a weakness that God has redeemed again and again.
Yes.
I love that. Like how gracious God is with us.
I marked that same spot, and I loved that the end where he said, like, getting out of it has always led to something healing or edifying.
Mm.
And he
I
was
also really,
talking about,
oh,
I'm
sorry.
sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that there's a part that says, you know and understand things about the heart of God that only you can teach. Because each one of us has had a different life experience or different things that we've gone through that somebody else may not have that we can teach to others.
Yeah.
I like that part too.
Oh, this is one of my favorites. I'm going to relate this to a verse in Ephesians chapter 3, right before Paul talks about us knowing, like his prayer is that we would know how wide and how long and how deep and how high is the love of God for us. Right before that, he says, I pray that you, together with all the saints, would know how wide and how long and how deep. And I'm like, there's a level of understanding of God's love that gets greater as we interact with other people. Because then we see how God has moved in your life and in your life and in your life. And I'm like, oh, because we can understand God's love for ourselves. Absolutely. God can reveal his love to us. But when we see how he's moving in other people, it just expands that so much greater because we each have our own unique experiences. And you're right. And that connecting, like finding or hearing how we each have something to say. Katie, is what you were just saying. Like we each have an aspect of God's love to share with other people that will only increase their own understanding, just like our understanding is increased when we hear other people's stories. I love that connection point there. Oh, cool, Brandy. Happy to be here, artist. So it felt important to begin this book, especially after falling in love with the Wingfeather Saga. Perfect. Good timing. I'm glad you're here. And Glenda is also a bullet journaler. Fun. I like that, like the preface kind of sets it up. He's not gonna like paint everything in rose-colored glasses. Like he's real about where he's struggled or mistakes that he's made or just insecurities and things along the way. He kind of sets it right up. Like this is what you're gonna get. Like we're gonna be real here. Yeah. But then calls it's a love song, if you will, about the life God has given me. I love that last line of the preface. Can we move into chapter 1 then?
Yeah, sounds good. I didn't really mark a lot in this one. I do just at the beginning, like where he was talking about like all the things he thought he had to do to line up perfectly in order for like God's plan to work out in his life. Like he was debating on like, if I marry this woman, am I still going to be able to like pursue music? But knowing that, you know, he says, if God wants you to play music, dummy, you'll play music whether you're married or not. Like, I'm like, yeah, that I feel like that a lot in my life. I say like, well, it has to line up this way. If I do this, then maybe this won't happen. But like, if it's God's will, he will make it happen for you, you know, as long as you're faithful to him. And, you know, so I appreciated that he mentioned that.
Yeah. And I loved early on just the reminder to seek first the kingdom of God. And that sometimes our focus gets so centered on what it is that we want to do or accomplish or be or become or produce or whatever, that we're forgetting to keep our focus on the Lord, and then all of that will be worked out according to his will. Like if we seek first the kingdom of God, and he says we may want something harmless, but if it's out of place, if it comes before the right thing, which is seeking the Lord, then what's benign becomes malignant. We want the wrong thing. So when we're wanting the success or the song or the whatever, then our focus is not on the right thing, and that becomes a bad thing that potentially can become an idol or different things. We have to remember that's just a good perspective reminder. I'm always needing to be reminded about perspective because I think it's so easy for our attentions to shift.
That's what I always try to do before I write or before I Bible journal. I say, God, let this be for your glory. Guide my hands to what you want me to write and what to do, because
Yeah.
it's all his ideas.
Nice.
It's not mine, it's his.
Mm-hmm. And then it goes into a little bit of like memoir, kind of like how it all got started. I grew up taking piano lessons, like classical piano. So I loved hearing that Bach on all of his music put SDG at the end, which is Solo Deo Gloria. And at the beginning, it's like Jesus help, whatever it was. I forget the Jesu Juva or whatever, which is Latin for Jesus help. And then at the end, it's all for God's glory. I love that. And I thought the prayer, I don't know if this was their actual prayer or if he was just kind of writing it out, but right at the end on page 8, Jesus, you're the source of beauty. Help us make something beautiful. Jesus, you're the word that was with God in the beginning, the word that made all creation. Give us words to be with us in this beginning of this creation. Jesus, you're the light of the world. Light our way into this mystery. Jesus, you love perfectly and with perfect humility. Let this imperfect music bear your perfect love to every ear that hears it. I'm like, oh, that's such a good prayer. I love it.
That was the only part that I marked in chapter 1 was that prayer. Because I love that. And you can apply it to obviously any area of your life.
Yeah. It's just acknowledging Jesus as the source and the one who went before. Like, okay, you've already done this and this is who you are. So now help me as I move in this direction. Like, it just refocuses that perspective. Brandy says, it's amazing that we as believers get to be witnesses to not only our own story and walk with the Lord, but we're also seeing his infinite expressions of grace in others all around us. Yeah. Isn't that beautiful? I love that. Life distractions pull our attention in other directions. Absolutely. Even if it's benign, right? Because it's not always a bad thing that we're wanting or desiring. It's often a good thing. But if it becomes before him, it could become malignant. Yeah. When all is gone, it will be clear that the only thing you ever really had was this wild and holy spirit that whirls about inside you, urging you to follow where the wind blows. Love that. I love learning. Yeah. Box notes in his music sheets. I love that too. Cool. Well, let's go right into chapter 2 in the beginning. It's nice short chapters. I've said, I was talking to the girls ahead of time, and those of you who are here, you'll probably know. I feel like this is going to be quicker chats than we've had in previous months, just because the chapters are pretty short. And yeah, so it'll just be nice to chit chat for a few minutes and then carry on with our Sunday. So we're in the beginning, really talking about that self-doubt, that insecurity whenever you're starting something new. And just being open. Katie, kind of how you talked about praying and knowing that it's God's ideas. He's like, I'm so small and so insignificant. Like, how can I have anything to say?
That's the part I was going to mention. He's like, I have nothing to offer. And he heard, well, write about that.
Yeah.
Write about how you're feeling right now.
Yeah.
And the ideal will come from that.
I think it's funny how, like, as Christians, sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves to be, because we're like, well, I'm representing Jesus, so I have to do it well. And that is a valid concern. But so often, like, it's in our moments of weakness that we relate with other people. And that's where that connection is made. Sometimes it's not when you're like all haughty toddy, like,
Yeah.
look, my life is perfect, because nobody's life is.
No.
So I think it's really interesting to like just take a step back and remember that, yes, we are trying to represent Jesus, but we aren't God. Like, we aren't going to live a perfect life. And this is just showcasing like we're weak, but he's strong in our weakness. And this is why we need him. So I like that reminder in all of this, that he is being very human, and he's showcasing like, I'm not saying this for pity. I'm saying this because of relatability. And I'm like, yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
I felt like it was so relatable, like that, especially for me. Like, I'll either be like a perfectionist about things or like insecure and then not do anything. So I thought it was just, I mean, he's obviously done a lot of things and he still struggled with that beforehand.
There was 2 lines in here that I just thought were so beautiful. He says, "The spark of the idea was hope. The work that led to the song was faith, and the completion of the song leads to worship." I just thought that was really cool. Like, in thinking about any kind of a project, like at the beginning, there's all of that hope. And then as you're walking it out, you just got to kind of do the work. And that's the faith. Like, this is going to lead to something. God's going to use this somehow. And then when you see it, when we are able and blessed to be able to see the fruition of whatever it is, that leads us to worship, because God did it ultimately. And then in the next paragraph on page 11, he said, "The point is, time is unfolding like a scroll, and we're letters on the parchment, helping to make up the words that tell the story." I saw that was really cool picture writing there.
Yeah, there's a part that says, since we were made to glorify God, worship happens when someone is doing exactly what he or she was made to do.
Mhm.
And sometimes you just have to remind yourself about that. Like, I know people who don't write in their Bibles and can't understand why people would write or draw in their Bibles. And you just have to say, this is the way I worship. And God understands that I have to do physical worship rather than just taking notes or just, having a separate journal. I have to get in there and do art so I get more out of his word. And we all worship in different ways.
Yeah, that's so true. I love KRT said that was her favorite quote too. Love it. I was wondering, like, because I really don't have any desire to write. Like, I don't journal anything. Like, I just don't write really very much at all. And don't feel that urge. So I'm like, I'm hopeful. I was hopeful before starting this book. I'm like, oh, is this going to really, am I going to relate to this at all? Is this going to be interesting? Not interesting, but like, am I going to connect to it? And I feel like I am. So that's good. I feel a little bit like, separate from the content, I feel like the style is a little clunky at first. I feel
Yeah.
like by the end of chapter 4, I was getting into the flow of it a little more. But at the beginning, I'm just like, I don't know. Sometimes I've read nonfiction where they're talking to the reader directly, like, you do this, whatever.
Mhm.
And it's felt very much like I'm sitting down with a friend chatting with them, and I didn't get that vibe, even though that's the style he's writing in. A little bit. I don't know. I feel like it was just taking me a minute to kind of get into his writing.
Yeah.
Did you guys feel that?
Yeah, I get that. And it's definitely more memoir than it is like application right now. And I typically like things with more like meat to
Yeah.
like take. So I'm having to look a little bit between the lines with some of that. But I mean, we're only 4 chapters in, so I'm
Right.
hoping maybe a little bit more of that will be
Yeah.
dispersed throughout.
Yeah, I hope so too.
I really love memoirs, so I was kind of excited that it was going that direction a little bit more, but I was a little bit lost with like some of the music stuff because I was like, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
And it was a lot there for a minute.
I think we get into that a lot more in this third chapter. He gets talking a little bit more about his start with stuff. Yeah. All right. I love that sacred and scared are only with one letter switched. I thought that he doesn't really talk about that in there, but as I looked at it, I'm like, wow, that's very close. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like I'm listening to the book, so I feel like it's a. I think she pushed return before finishing. Sorry, Donna. Finish your thought. It's leaning. Okay, Brandy says it's leaning more memoir. I too was looking for the application and process mechanics. Yeah, and maybe we'll get there a little bit more as we go into it. Oh, she feels like it's a chat, kind of sitting like because she's able to hear it. Okay, sacred and scared. Scared and sacred.
There's a part that made me laugh right near the beginning when he says, reminder, this isn't a pity party. I'm just letting you in on the grim reality of what goes on in a person's head when they do creative work, mainly so you know you're not crazy or alone.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying, you're not the only person who's going through a creative process. Like all of us have been there going crazy in the moment.
It's always nice to be reminded that we're not alone. Like nothing that we experience is unique. Like someone has experienced it before and probably is at the same moment as us. But it's we get so isolated, or we feel so isolated sometimes in the way that we're feeling about things. But I feel like BookTube reminds us of that all the time. I'm like, I must be the only person who hasn't read this, and then out of the woodwork, oh, I haven't read it either. I haven't read it either. Like we're never really alone.
Yeah, I like how in the next chapter or two he talks more about God and his faith more than the first few chapters.
Yeah.
It's like there's one part that I highlighted that says, I exist as his redeemed creation, and that is pleasantly enough for him.
Mhm. Nice. Go ahead, Bethany. Go ahead.
I like how so on page 15 is where it starts, and he is like being really honest about how his fear of irrelevance drove him to do this. And then he said, but that's not exactly a noble reason to fling your creation into the world. But after that, the Lord can redeem your impulse for self-preservation by easing you toward love. And I just liked that he shared that and how, yeah, like God can redeem that.
Yeah, I liked the pull between like that desire to be invisible, or like that feeling of isolation that I was talking about, but also at the same time this yearning to be seen and truly known by others. And that like pull between those two things is so real. It's not necessarily a good thing, but if our focus is on God, we won't live there for a long time. But I could relate with that. Like I have a YouTube channel. So like tons of people. I'm like putting myself out there, but at the same time, like the insecurities scream at me sometimes. And it's like I just want to hide and like not really show myself. But at the same time, I want people to know who I am and know me. Yeah, that pull is I could really relate to that.
We definitely have a desire for like belonging and community too, though. And I think that that's a God-given thing. Like we're created, to have a relationship with him, but with others too. So I think it goes hand in hand with like wanting that connection and wanting to be in the world. So.
Absolutely. And then I was going to ask, because in particular, those of you who are artistic in the comments and on screen, he said something, he was quoting someone else, Walt Wangren Jr., in the middle of page 15. This Walt guy said once that art isn't art until it's experienced by another. And I wanted to know if you guys agree with that. That art isn't art until it's experienced by another.
Well, if you count God, he sees your art. There you go.
Yeah. It's kind of like if the tree falls in a forest, it doesn't make any noise.
Right.
Because I feel like art is art, like whether or not
Right.
anyone sees it.
Because some people don't share their art with other people. It's just like their special thing.
Expression, right?
But like Katie said, God sees it. So
That's right.
on page 19, he talks about where he left the previous chapter off with the question of who do I think I am anyway. I really like that conversation on identity, and that he says we need not look anywhere but to the eyes of our Savior for our true identity, an identity which is profoundly complex, unfathomable, deep as the sea, and yet can be boiled down to one little word: beloved. That's it. And that's why it's so silly and perilous to use your gifting to clothe yourself with meaning. Those clothes will never quite fit. And again, just another reminder that, how often in life do we put our job or our gifting like as definitive of who we are? Because I know, especially like all of us are on BookTube. So I don't know if you ever just like see that as part of your identity, because we do it so often. I find myself doing that. And just like you were talking about earlier, Krista, like making sure things aren't idols, like I've struggled with BookTube being that. And so I have to remind myself, like, this is something that like is a creative outlet. It's something I enjoy. I'm gifted in areas to be able to do it. And I just enjoy it as a hobby, but it doesn't define who I am, like at my core. God defines who I am at my core. And he's the only one that's going to like anything else I do in life. Like, yes, it's important and it's good, but at the core, I have to remember my identity is in him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he speaks to that to a degree. And on page 18, and right in the middle, he says the Christian's calling in part is to proclaim God's dominion in every corner of the world, in every corner of our hearts too.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's whatever we are doing, whether we're creating something or making a video on BookTube, or like as somebody who loves the Lord, like part of what we're doing is letting that light shine through the interwebs to those who happen to see it. And I think that's a good call. Like that's a good reason to keep going. Yeah.
I loved right after that part that you just read, Krista, on 18, that it said, "And the ground is already won, and we have the pleasure of declaring God's kingdom with love."
Mm-hmm. And earlier in this chapter, he says, right after what you had read before, Bethany, love is never about self. So it's never about us. It's about proclaiming God's kingdom. It's about making sure that he is glorified in what we say and do, or in the other person's life, that it's not about us. It's not selfish.
I really loved the neighbor story when he was talking about the house being built and how she literally put a verse on every single 2x4 she could find. I just thought that was so great. Like she was praising and worshiping God through their house, saying, "Thank you, God, for allowing us to have this house that's being built," and rededicating it to him. And I just thought that was great. I'm like, whenever I build a house, I'm gonna be doing the exact same thing.
I know, that's super cool. I thought that was cool too. Just as a way to kind of dedicate that place, that home.
Yeah, and I like how he talked about a little bit in the next page how saying a daily a pledge of every atom or every tool that we use in our lives, like whether it's the vacuum cleaner or the teapot or whatever, like just thanking him for that tool and being able to use it and whether it's through our art or whatever that we do creatively, just thanking him and, just pledging that item for his glory. Because a teapot could lead to a conversation if you have a friend over.
That's
It
right.
could lead to a conversation about faith in God.
Yeah.
That also made me think about my day job. And like Keisha was saying earlier, and her and I have talked about this before, just it not feeling super creative or what we imagined. And so this section just got me thinking of do I dedicate that, even though it seems okay, well, God, how would you use this? But do I dedicate that to him?
I think that's part of just and I struggle with this, but remembering that he tells us the work of our hands bring him glory, So what we're doing, just work as if you're working for the Lord, because that's why we're doing what we're doing. And we don't always see what we're doing as purposeful. I've definitely had work where I'm this feels wasteful, but as long as we're working for the Lord, he's going to use that for his glory.
Yeah. And I love that he chooses to use us even in the midst of our imperfections and in our doubts and in our insecurities. He will still use that. And he talks about that right at the last paragraph. He's like, do you see how God redeemed and continues to redeem the broken and selfish motives that drove me here? He's like, even though what got me here wasn't always the right thinking or right perspective to have or whatever, but God still redeemed it and used it, which I just think you see all throughout the Bible. I mean, even David, who had a torrid affair and had the husband killed, right? He was still called a man after God's own heart. Constantly in the Bible, God uses and chooses to use people in all of their imperfections. And I just think that that's beautiful because he's still doing that today. He's still using us in the midst of our doubts and insecurities and mess ups and whatever. He will redeem it because it's all about his kingdom. It's all for his glory ultimately, which is a beautiful thing because we're going to keep messing up. We're going to keep having insecurities. It's just, we can try all we want to, but we're still human, struggling along the way. But to surrender, I've learned the only way to victory is to lose myself, to surrender to sacredness, which is safer than insecurity. I love that. And accept the fact that I'm beloved by God. That's it. Compared to that, the songs don't matter so much. A realization that has a surprising consequence of making them easier to write. I love it. Let me put some of these comments up here. Okay. I'm so glad it's drawing you to God, so I like it for that reason. Talking about the book in general. Funny how writing styles hit people differently. It's definitely reflective essay and memoir. Exact favorite type of nonfiction. Perfect. He lets us into his head to understand his self-doubt in that process and how he gets back to God's love. Yeah. Love it. And yet at war with that desire. Yeah. To be invisible is a yearning to be seen and known and valued. As an introvert, I hear you. Yeah. Yep. I did feel much encouragement through his personal experiences, especially when he felt ruined and defeated. I think the devil would have us feel isolated in our defeat and failures alone. Yeah. We are never fully alone. Totally. Art is art. We share it for our souls. Sometimes we make art because it's good for our soul. 100%. Because we are created by a creative God, right? And we're made in his image. So it's a part of us. We can't escape it. So sometimes just the act of creating itself is enough. Proclaim God's dominion. Yep. If we're made in his image, then showing, yeah. I didn't see this first. I should have just put your comment up there. Exactly right. Enjoying it with humankind is kind of a big deal in way of loving on folks and witnessing to others. Love that. Yeah. Oh, the woman who wrote the verses on the 2x4s. Be kind to yourself. Is that one of his songs? I don't know that one. And he continues to redeem, accept that I'm beloved by God. So true. Yep. Perfect. Let's move right on to chapter 4, Behold the Lamb. So this is Behold the Lamb is an actual show that you can do. It's not like a musical. with words and a story per se. I mean, it is a story because it's the story of Jesus, Christmas story, I think. Oh, it is one of his songs. Cool. Which I was like, I should find that song and play a little clip of it, but I didn't do that. I was not that prepared. But I will try to find that Spotify playlist and put it in the comments. But this is the one where I'm like, oh, Rich Mullins, I know that name. Carolyn Arendz, I know that name. Laura Story, I know that name. Caedmon's Call was like my band when I was in college. I love Caedmon's Call.
So the only one I knew, like, I feel like Rich Mullins, like, I knew the name, but I couldn't pinpoint until you sang the song earlier, and I was like, that's it. Laura Story, I know her, but everybody else, I have no idea who they were.
And I love that Laura wrote Indescribable when she was driving to meet with these guys. I was like, that's so cool. Indescribable, uncontainable, awestruck. I haven't sung that in so long. I didn't underline. I don't know if I underlined anything in this chapter. Oh, the last sentence, but we'll wait.
Yeah. That's about like where I was the last 2 pages because he was telling the story most of it.
I was like, I think even who was that other band that he started off with? I think I even know them. Siler's Bald, which is a terrible name. She says that in here. Like, this is a really bad name, but I feel like I know them too. I'd have to listen to some of their songs, but I'm pretty sure I knew who that was back in the day too.
Yeah, I didn't highlight anything either until about the middle. But it just hit me because he says, you can think and plan and think some more, but none of that is half as important as doing something, however imperfect or incomplete it is.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful. I talked with another author at an event. She wasn't there as an author. She was just a reader there. But she said, like, the biggest tip I can give a writer is just to continue writing. Don't go back and edit. Don't go back and change anything. She said the first draft is always the hardest for anybody, and most people quit because they go back and edit. And she said, just keep writing no matter how awful it is. And it has helped so much.
Yeah. Well, I feel like because we want things to be done well, we care, right? So we get stuck in that thinking and planning stage where we just like kind of spiral. But what about this? And how do I need to do that? What if this comes up? And we get stuck in that. So sometimes you're right. It's just good to jump in, get started. I love it. I mean, they were booking concerts before all the songs were even written. Like, what?
That was my fear. When I read that, I was like, oh no, am I going to get like a publisher house in the next couple like months that want my book? And it's not even like a quarter of the way written.
Yeah. I mean, that would be cool. Yeah, that's what the last sentence of this chapter. We're invited to join with all nature in manifold witness to his great faithfulness. And since creation is going to declare it either way, we might as well jump in with our half-finished songs and join the chorus. I loved it.
Yeah, and we're not invited into this because God needs us, but because he wants us. Like a chair. Like, he doesn't
that's good.
need us, but he created us because he wants us to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's really encouraging. Just to know, like, we don't have to do it perfectly. It's not like we have to do it a certain way because he needs us to. It's because he wants us to be a part of it.
Right. Cool. We just started a series about prayer in my church, and that's one of the things he talked about today. He's like, God knows everything. He knows all of our thoughts. He knows everything that we need. He knows all of that, but he just wants us to come to him and to like have those conversations with him. He's like, as a dad, I feel the same way about my kid. He's like, I know what he wants and I know what he's going to ask usually before he asks for it, but I just want him to like feel like he can come to me and talk about that thing or ask for that thing, because it shows a level of trust. It shows a level of like relationship there. And so that's a big part of what prayer is. God already knows. And so some people are like, well, we don't need to pray because God already knows what I need. But there's deeper stuff going on. And I feel like creating is kind of in the same vein. Like, we don't know the outcome, or we don't know what it fully is going to look like or be like, but It's what we're made to do. Just do it. Oh, that's funny. Be prepared to hear the name Rich Mullins many times. He's a major fanboy. That's funny. Oh, cool. Laura Story has written a couple books as well. When God Doesn't Fix It. Nice. Did you guys have anything else from this chapter?
No, I think that was basically it for me.
Me too.
All right. Well, next week we'll talk 5 through 8. And it's only another like 30, 40 pages. So it shouldn't take anyone too long to read them. I guess we're kind of, oh no, 5 through 8. I need to go a couple more. 45 pages. It's not super long, regardless. So hopefully it's enjoyable and that we can get stuff out of it. Thank you guys for joining in. And I challenge everybody to do something creative this week, whatever that might look like for you. Whether it's writing a note to a friend or Bible journaling or making a piece of art or writing or whatever. It could look like lots of different things. Do something different with your job or try an idea that you've been thinking about that you haven't done yet, whatever it might be. Just jump in and watch what God might do with that. Use it, how he might use it. Thank you guys for joining. In the comments, if you're watching later, if you're watching now, I'm glad you're here. And that's going to be it for this week. We'll see you next Sunday. And I'm doing sprints later. So if you want to come back in a couple hours, I'll be doing sprints. I'm going to go for a quick walk before the sun totally goes down. All right. See you all next week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.